In this video, I'm going to show how we can use POPGROUP to operationalize the cohort component projection methodology. So as a reminder of the cohort component projection methodology itself, this involves starting off with a base population, which we have by single year of age, and also distinguishing males and females. And what we're doing is we're first of all aging this population on. So moving each bar in this population pyramid up by 1 year. But this will be a very poor population projection if we did this, because clearly there will be births occurring during this aging on process. There will be deaths and migration, which will also affect our population. So we need to add on the births that occur in the first year of life. And we need to take away estimates of the numbers of people who die at each age group, and for males and females separately. And we can see in this pyramid of deaths, these are clustered at the older ages in particular. We also need to add in any in-migration that occurs. You can see here in this pyramid of in-migration that we have a fairly standard pattern of migration, with most migrants being in the younger working ages. And also a bulge in migration of children, so migration linked to families moving. We also need to take away estimates of out-migration. So after we've done this process of aging our population on, after accounting for births, deaths, in and out migration, we generate our population at a time point in the future. So we can operationalize this cohort component projection methodology in POPGROUP, and this really requires us to specify assumptions or data on our population base, fertility, mortality, and migration, which we do using a whole set of migration files. So we start off with a POP base Excel file, which contains single year of age and sex values for each population group. Then, for each year of the forecast, we need to first of all subtract what are known as special populations. So these are groups within our population that we might not want to treat the normal cohort component methodology of aging on and estimating birth, death, and migration. So this will include things like armed forces, it will include people in prisons, and it will also include students. So we take away estimates of those special populations from our population base. And in POPGROUP, we have a special populations Excel file that contains the information on our special populations. We then need to estimate births and deaths. And we do this using two Excel files, usually called STHRT and MORT. So these are used to estimate births and deaths, which are added to or subtracted from our age sex structure of our base population, which is also then aged on by 1 year. We can calculate migration both in and out using a set of migration Excel files, which we add or subtract from our population base. We can then add our special populations back in, and then POPGROUP allows us to constrain our population to a particular constraint for a forecast year. So we may know that there's some house building going on within an area. We might want to constrain our population to fill those houses. And again, we can specify some POPGROUP files to make that constraint. And the way that the constraint is made is each population group's migration is altered so that it meets this population constraint that we specify. We then move to the question of whether this is the final year of the forecast. If not, then we go back around this loop of adding back in special populations, aging our population on, adding in birth, deaths, and migration, taking into account any constraints that we wish our population to be constrained to in particular forecast years. If this is the final year of the population projection, then POPGROUP will then produce a whole set of output reports which contain the results of our projection, as well as the facilities to analyse and display results from our projections. POPGROUP is based on Excel, and it has a standard file setup procedure to run a population projection, and that starts off with what's known as a model setup file. So this model setup file specifies the population groups which you're producing projections for. So these population groups may be areas, so it could be Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire, but equally it could be population groups based on characteristics such as ethnicity. For example, we could produce projections for different ethnic groups. When you run a model setup file and you've specified the population groups that you wish to produce projections for, POPGROUP will then set up a set of files associated with that particular projection model. So these will include skeleton files, input files, and output files. The skeleton files contain all of the Excel files for the various parts of your projection, so your population base, the files containing it that will contain assumptions around fertility, mortality, and migration. But crucially, these skeleton files don't contain any data. You can add the data into those skeleton files themselves. POPGROUP will also create a folder which is labeled input files. So this is where the skeleton files that you fill with data will be saved. So you have a skeleton file for your pop base, which you will fill with population data for the base year of your projection. And similarly, you will fill skeleton files of fertility, mortality, and migration with the fertility, mortality, and migration data that you have, and save those in the input files folder. So we usually have a pop base file, a fertility file, a mortality file, and 4 migration files reflecting in and out migration, firstly within the UK, and then in and out migration from outside the UK. The other file that you will have within your input files is a scenario file. So this will tell POPGROUP which of the input folders to include in the projection. So you may include in one projection the pop base file, which must be there as a base to your population, the files on fertility and mortality, but you might choose just to include migration files on migration to and from the UK. You may choose to exclude the migration files from overseas, outside the UK, from a particular model. So the scenario specifies which particular input files are included in your POPGROUP model. So quite a bit of flexibility here to include different assumptions around fertility and mortality that you might save in different fertility and mortality files. So when you run the scenario, POPGROUP will then produce the projection, and it will save that projection in a folder called output files, which contains a whole set of files holding the results from your projection, as well as the capacity to analyze those projections and produce charts and tables showing how population and components of change, fertility and mortality and migration change over the projection period.